Hello, welcome and thank you for being here today. Steve would have loved to have been here and among his family and friends. It's all very amazing. Before I start, I'm supposed to say turn off your cell phones. The restrooms are open and they are down there. There's, of course, water over here. And when you come through this shelter to look at the exhibit, do a one-way trip around the area. So can you hear me okay, everyone back there? And speakers, when you come up, speak right into the microphone. I'm very honored to present this celebration for Steve, and I want to thank everyone who helped me gather today in this time when it's very difficult to have gatherings like this, but I had such fabulous support. Thank you, everyone. First, I just want to say 3 words, and that is, we did it. All of us helped in this very profound transition between life as Steve knew it and his last breath. I cannot begin to tell you, our family and our community, how much you supported us through these waves of the unknown, the uncharted, and the unfamiliar. Although it was a difficult journey at times, it was filled with incredible blessings. And I can't tell you how many blessings came from this. And these blessings helped because of all of you. First, I want to thank our strong children and their partners who were present for Steve and me. They were courageous and loving and sensitive, despite the deep pain in their hearts. Steve and I watched them become another level of adult before our very eyes. Watched them come out of their own skin and witness the reality of a parent's death with love and compassion. They stepped up big time, and I so love them. I also want to thank our extended family for being there for us, for visiting us, for helping us, and for making things right. And thank you to our community of friends. You made it possible to enjoy the time we did have, and able then for Steve and I to live a meaningful, present, and adventurous life. Your generosity, talk time, travel, food, meetings of all sorts, including Zoom meetings, words of encouragement, prayers, and your sharing of places sacred to Steve's heart were beyond imagination. It carried us over waves of intense ambiguity. You were there, and we were buoyant because of you. Steve Christiansen was my best friend and the love of my life. I fell in love with him the instant we met. Steve helped me with absolutely everything I did in my life. To a social world, to a world of different kinds of people, to a magical world so much broader than I had ever experienced. Steve made everything easier for me, both in life and in death. I am deeply, deeply grateful that this kind, gentle, and cosmic soul shared so many years of his life with me.
That was beautiful. When Steve and I were just kids, family went for a picnic out in the country, and as the boys do, we went exploring into the woods, and we got lost. And I was very scared and thinking irrationally. But Steve kept his cool, and he led the way, and we eventually found a country road, and the road led to a house. And anyways, we got rescued. School was a cakewalk for me, thanks to Steve, because I was 1 year behind him, had all the same teachers growing up, and Steve was an A student. They just figured I was too. I got a pass. Sports was big in our family. Steve and I played a lot of one-on-one basketball, and I know that he would let me win sometimes, just so I wouldn't be discouraged. And he also let me come into his room in the evenings, and we would listen to Yankee baseball. There was a vivid memory, an epic moment in Yankee baseball history that I actually missed out on. It was an extra inning game, and maybe I went to bed. But Steve told me all about it the next morning, when Mickey Mantle hit the longest home run in baseball history. Steve said he could hear the crack of the bat, like he was right there. And instantly, the announcer, Phil Rizzuto, just went nuts. The ball was, it hit the back wall behind the upper deck in Yankee Stadium, just inches from going out of the park. And it hit it so hard, it came back into the infield. Sports writers had a field day on that one. One of them said, if it wasn't for that wall, that ball would still be going. Steve went to San Francisco for the Summer of Love. I didn't make it out to the West Coast until a couple of years later. Steve was living in Berkeley in a crash pad, and I hooked up with him there. My memory of Berkeley was a momentous time in my life. Telegraph Avenue, Sproul Plaza. But I ran out of money and had to go back to the safety of our family home. A few years later, there was big trouble in our family. Parents split up, and my mom went off the deep end. My dad was just trying to find himself. And Steve became the patriarch of our family. He reached out to all of us, especially to Corey. I just want to say, Corey, I wish you could have been here, and I miss you. Steve was like a brother, a mother, and a father to Corey. And we were all scattered at that time. We were all living in different states. There was no family home. Steve was living in Bandon, and I was light years away in Rochester, New York. I needed a change. I think Steve knew that. He called and said, "Scott, you got to come out to Oregon." So I did. I like to think of that time in our family was best described by the words of Ken Kesey. One went east, one went west, and one flew over the cuckoo's nest. I arrived in Bandon on the 4th of July. And Steve was living in a cabin on the edge of the forest, where the forest transitioned to the beach. It was a special place. We went for a long walk on the beach. I think we saw 2 or 3 other people that day. I fell in love with Oregon right there. The next day, on the front page of the Oregonian was an aerial photograph of Jones Beach in Long Island. It was wall-to-wall beach umbrellas. And the caption read, "Don't anyone tell them about Oregon." It's too late for me, Steve already did. Moved to Eugene the next day. Steve came up just a few weeks later, and he never left. Life in Eugene was a bright new chapter in my life. It was fun to be a sports fan, especially a basketball fan. Football, not so much back then. It was the era of the kamikaze kids. And I will forever remember the Ducks going on a road trip to Pauley Pavilion. The Bruins were sitting on a 99-game home winning streak. And they were ready to rock, but they weren't ready for the kamikaze kids. Because that game was David and Goliath Act 2. It was amazing. There was another moment in Steve's life in Eugene that I was not a witness to, but I heard about it the next day when Steve rescued a young boy who had climbed a tree to retrieve a frisbee, I guess. And he grabbed hold of the power line, electrocuted himself. And Steve just happened to be right there. He climbed up the tree, pulled him down, and saved his life. The next day, I was with Steve, and he didn't even mention it. Somebody else brought it up. Just another day in the life of Steve. I moved on to Corvallis and then got my first real job in Southern California. But my relationship with Steve went south. And I imprisoned myself in a wilderness without brotherly love. Fast forward to 2 months ago. I heard Steve wasn't doing good. So I had to come up here. We spent a beautiful 2 days together. We made peace. I don't really know how. It was a miracle. Steve set me free. The next morning, I had to go and was putting my stuff in the car. And Steve and Margie were on the porch saying goodbye. Steve said, "I love you, Scott." he didn't just say, I love you. He said, I love you, Scott. Those were his last words to me.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Margie. Wow, it's pretty hard to follow you on that, but thank you. I thought long and hard about what I would say to all of you. First of all, thank you all for being here. I'm Roger, for those of you who don't know who I am. I'm the youngest brother, and I too miss Corey very much. I wish Corey was here, but I understand. What I wanted to tell you all today was a little story about my father. My father, Gordon Christiansen, he died in October 6, 1978, quite a long time ago. I was 26, and he died very suddenly. None of us expected it. None of us were there. And none of us got a chance to say goodbye or to spend the time with him that we would have liked to. And that's one of the most amazing things for me about Steve at this time, these last few months, is I and my family and many, many people here were able to spend that time with Steve. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. And I'm so thankful we all had that opportunity. But Scott's story reminded me of some other things I wanted to say, which is that growing up in our house, my father introduced us to the Yankees. And as Scott had mentioned, we were all big sports fans. And I found out from Scott later when we talked that my father actually took Steve and Scott to Yankee Stadium to see the Yankees. And when I found out about that, I was really upset because I wanted to go. But I was too young. I'm 4 years younger than Steve. So I guess I just didn't make the cut. But that reminded me of a time when Steve and Jory and Spencer and I went to Yankee Stadium, all dressed up in our Yankee stuff. And we had a great time at Yankee Stadium, all four of us. And that sports theme was within our family all around. And so I realized that it all started with my father, that he passed that whole sports thing with all of us. And it's been passed down from Steve to his family. Claire, we're all friends. In fact, Claire and I have had some wonderful times at Yankee Stadium. Never forget the Abanez nights. Amazing. I won't waste your time with that, but it was great. I spent a lot of time up here with Steve the last few months, and what I really enjoyed about being with him is when he was first diagnosed with cancer, he wasn't depressed. He didn't, like, all of a sudden try to change or do something. He really embraced it, and all of a sudden I saw Steve really open up and become at peace with so many things, with all of us, with everything that was going on in his life. And I was really struck by the time that he walked me over to what they call the bog. It's a little garden area in a house a couple of doors up. And we walked over to the bog and we hung out and spent time. I think Bruce was with us at one point. And I realized that was Steve's way of sort of saying goodbye to all of us, taking us to this special place in nature and sharing conversation in just this beautiful place. And I think a lot of you had spent time with him in that bog. And when I was around Steve those last few months, I found that his spirit was bright. It was like a light shining. And he was really, really letting go of so many of the things that we had all harbored in the past, differences and misunderstandings and things like that. And I feel so blessed that I was able to spend that time with him where he was able to let go of so much of that and come at peace with everything. So I just wanted to say that that I felt that the last few months of Steve's life here were amazing, and with all of his family here and all of your friends. There was one other story I wanted to tell, was that when my father died back in October 1978, it was so sudden, none of us really knew what to experience in terms of grief. And I didn't really know much about grief because our father was the first person in our family to die. So that was October. I was in New Mexico that he died. I flew back to New York City where I was working as a cameraman, and it was now December, and it was a Christmas party, and I left the Christmas party to go back home to Queens, and I was heading down Fifth Avenue to the subway. It was late at night, and I looked up, and there was the Empire State Building, all lit up with green and red, the Christmas colors. And as I looked at it, I realized it was Christmas. And for the last several years, I had gone down to Bethesda, Maryland to be with my father for Christmas. And I realized that I was never going to be able to do that again. So all of a sudden, the grief hit me, and I started to weep. Not cry, weep. I could not control it. I could not stop. And I walked to the subway, I got on the train, and I had to face the doors so that nobody could see me because I was just weeping. I got home, my roommates tried to console me, and for hours and hours, I was grieving. I had never felt that before. I'd never experienced that before. When I was up here visiting Steve, I started to feel that same grief again. I shared that grief with both Margie and Claire. With Steve, not so much. I just shared my time with Steve. But I realized that grief is a really interesting thing. I have no control over it, and it just happens. So after Steve passed in July 17th this year, I went back to LA, and I was sitting in my living room watching television, and all of a sudden the news came on that said that the Pac-12 football season had just been canceled. And I said, oh man, no Ducks, no USC. So I said, I gotta call Steve and talk to him, see what his thoughts are. And then it hit me again. I can't call Steve. And then the grief hit me again. And it's those little things, those little moments in our lives that will always, that we share with Steve, that we share with each other, that will bring us back to that moment. So, but my final time with Steve, I felt that Steve had really come to peace with everything in his life and everybody. And I'm glad that we all got to share that in his house, with his family, with everybody there. I think that was very special. So I'd like to close with just a couple of little things. Go Ducks, go Yankees, go Steve. Thank you.
I'm David Northway. I'm honored and terrified that I'm considered a Christiansen brother, and I'm following Roger and Scott. But then I realized I grew up in Ohio. I was always a Cincinnati Redlegs fan. And if I had to choose the American League, it would be the Boston Red Sox. So it's like, oh, definitely not a Christiansen. Steve and my family, I wrote some stuff, I might go off script a little. Steve and my family have been intertwined for a number of years, and folks keep mentioning Corey, the youngest sister. Steve, in his incredibly generous manner, took on care of Corey when the family sort of exploded, and Corey moved in with them for a couple of years in high school in Ohio. When Steve moved to Bandon, Corey came out to Bandon and took one look at Bandon High School and said, that's not mine. So she ended up moving with my family for a year and finishing high school there. And my parents came out and lived with Steve and Margie Winter and Spencer were gone. And so our families have been intertwined in this weird way that I could be a brother. Anyway, let's see. I wrote the obituary piece that's in the program, so I'm not sure I have a lot more to add, but I've known Steve for more than 4 decades, so I could easily and happily laud Steve and tell Steve stories for hours, but I promise I won't take a lot of time. I just want to share a few anecdotes. In the last few weeks of Steve's life, we talked about our history together, from our first meeting in the fall of 1967 at Antioch through multiple adventures. Steve convinced me to move to Eugene, I guess like Scott too. I had property in British Columbia and traveled back and forth regularly from Berkeley to BC, and each trip I would stop in Eugene. Steve took me to Cougar Hot Springs with snow falling, and it was quite magic. And then in the summers, he would take me out to the lakes and rivers, share the bounty of corn and fresh fruit. One trip, he took me to cow patty-lined fields of psychedelic mushrooms that were out by Crow and Bonita. Saturday market, country fair, they were all quite enticing. But when I finally discovered the real estate prices in Eugene were insanely low compared to Berkeley, I thought, okay, that's it. I got to move here. Steve and I talked about our paths, how our paths might have been different had he not convinced me to move to Eugene. He helped pull me into this adulthood with that decision. In Berkeley, I kind of lived the hippie lifestyle, working when I had to, a few hours here, a few hours there. So I got my first full-time real job working in Eugene for someone else. Steve and I bought our first house together and had to get financially responsible. I earned 2 graduate degrees at the U of O, found a career, married Pearl, and had 2 daughters. Pearl and I like to think our influence on Steve helped convince him that Margie was the one, a keeper. Although, truth be told, he was pretty smitten with her on his own. We had our daughters, Claire and Barb, within 3 weeks of each other. In so many ways, I owe my life to what my life has become to Steve and that fateful decision. And I've been struggling what life will be like without him here for the last 50 years. As many of you know, I can be a bit cynical. Steve, that Eugene special, it had stalactites of plaster hanging from the ceiling, which we hadn't really taken into account. But during the painting, each stalactite became an icicle of dripping paint, completely covering us, the room, the equipment, and paint. We laughed and cried through a little rainstorm of paint. And yet he still continued to have complete confidence in many of my more impulsive and sometimes harebrained schemes. At one point, I convinced Steve we could save by not buying cable TV and by climbing outside the house on the pole and plugging our cable in and getting it for free. As was his nature, he went along with this, although I think he had some doubts. Then one night during the NBA playoffs and Portland Trailblazer game, we had a really bad windstorm and rainstorm. The cable kept falling out, and we had to take turns climbing the pole to plug the cable back in. The next day, Steve convinced me we should be more honest and probably more responsible, and that a cable subscription might be worth the cost and could save our lives. Every election, I called Steve to discuss choices. Which obscure judge did he support? What ballot measure made sense? Who would make the best Secretary of State? Because that was when Bradbury wasn't on the ballot. But who else might make the best Secretary of State? I will miss that this November, but I have a pretty good idea most of the time of what he would have suggested. He had very similar political views to mine, sometimes falling somewhat to the left of Che Guevara. Steve was a role model for me in so many ways. He led by example. He was active in the community, something I'm still working to get better at. Near the end, we had multiple discussions on death and dying, and his acceptance and grace and apparent lack of fear has once more pointed the way. I do only wish I'd been able to pick up this great natural jump shot in basketball, something I've never been good at. Clearly, I was also a younger Christiansen brother. Before Steve and Margie and Pearl and I had children, we had this great winter cross-country ski trip to Crater Lake. We stayed in small cabins, stayed up late at night, drank wine and talked, skied and laughed during the day. In recent years, now again without children in the home, we've had some great dinners together. Stayed up late, ate, drank, and carried on. We often talked of traveling together and spending more time together again. I'm really sad, as I'm sure many of you are, that the opportunity to spend more time with Steve and Martha is gone. At a less selfish level, I'm also really sorry the community has lost Steve's presence. His efforts, kindness, sense of humor, and work to help those who are much less fortunate than us is definitely still needed, particularly now. Last October, Steve, Margie, Pearl, and I traveled together to another friend's memorial service in the Bay Area. I said then I'd lost 3 really close college friends, and now less than a year later, I've lost a 4th. I'm reminded yet again of how much friendship and community mean to me. And I'm grateful we have this opportunity to get together, honor Steve, and I hope to get a chance to connect or reconnect with all of you before we lose another icon.
Listening is what I learned from Steve. I'm not as nice a guy as he was. No way. He taught me how to listen and then wait for what to say. He was one of the most authentic, sincere, devoted, humble people I've ever known in my life. My work is to know people. That's what I do for a living. How to know them and bring them together. Steve was a mentor of mine for that. I know him many, many years. I'm going to tell you a few little stories about things most of you don't know about him. In the early 70s, when he first started being a videographer, he was friends with a man named Steve Paxton, who in my mind is a legend in this time. In my mind, he's like the Miles Davis of jazz. But in the dance world, Steve agrees. And this man, Steve Paxton, created this new dance form that was focused on bringing people together in a way that grew out of the 70s, a generation that was sort of a radical fight against institutionalization of bodies and the world of dance run by men and opening it up to a sense of equality. Steve shot the first video material of those projects in the early 70s. Those videos traveled across the globe. Those videos have been seen by hundreds of thousands of people who were touched by them and from them, and the people that taught his work learned how to care about themselves, learned how to care about other people, learned how to touch other people in healthy, loving ways. Steve was my friend through those years. And then we both ended up living in Eugene, Oregon. Many years later, in 1987, I founded a project called Danceability International. It's to do the same thing, but with every person on the planet, that the earlier work that Steve shot had done. Steve volunteered, came and shot the first workshop that ever happened of this kind. Those videos also won international awards. Those videos have also been seen across the globe and have educated and touched and taught people how to be more loving, compassionate, and caring for themselves, for their relationships, for their community, and for their environment. All of things that were Steve's values. You all know that. Steve became the president for the board of my directors about, I don't know, maybe 12 years ago. And about 2 weeks before he went to dance somewhere else, I was supposed to have a meeting with him and he never showed up. Was not like Steve. He didn't even text me. So I said, oh, something's up. Of course, I know all along what was going on, but I had seen him so recently that I didn't imagine things were going to happen so quickly. When I finally went to see him at his house, Steve was really upset. And I didn't understand. And he was so taken by the fact that he had to tell me that he had to resign from the board of the directors. He was more concerned at that moment with me, about me and my organization, than him. He was 1 week away from his last day dancing here. And he was so concerned. I regret to this moment that I didn't take it seriously. I thought, oh, come on, Steve. No, we're all fine. But he was so profoundly sincere in that moment of caring for me and how we were going to continue without him. So we spent some time together after that, and we talked about all of the things that he wanted to talk about, our history also, how we met, what we've done over the years of our life together in service to many people. And then I got ready to leave, and he said, oh, before you leave, let me hug you. So I went to lean over the bed to hug him. And he said, no, 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 no. And he rolled over, sat on the side of the bed, and stood up. Put his arms around me. I put my arms around him. And we held each other for a few minutes. I know you could imagine how valued that holding of a few minutes means to me. Particularly in this time when we can't hug anybody. I'm walking around in a hug. I can't forget, my body will never forget, Steve is still with me. He's so with me that on that very day, 1 week passed from that moment, I went back to see Steve. We spent some more time together. In that time, Margie came in the room. And at some point of that period of time, she said, oh, me and Steve wrote these sort of memorial ideas of what music he was going to want played at his memorial. We wrote it about 2 years ago. So I said, oh, go get that list. I had my computer. We got out my computer and that list, and we played the songs that Steve wanted to hear, I guess, here. And I held his hands, and I danced with him because I dance with people in comas. That's part of what I do. So I didn't really feel he wasn't there. I held him, and I danced, and we listened to that beautiful, beautiful music. At one point during K.D. Lang singing Hallelujah, Margie was in the room with me. Steve rolled from the side open and reached his arms up into the sky. Not a lot, but enough for us to know he was doing it. To the song Hallelujah. It was an exquisitely beautiful moment. One last little story. On the day Steve went somewhere else, you don't want me to tell him? Too bad. On the day that he left, I lost one of my hearing aids. And I didn't notice I lost it until several hours later, after I had went home, got my two children. My children call Steve the funny guy. That's his nickname for my kids. On the way here, I took them to camp over here. And I said, I'm going to a memorial over there later. And I went to tell them what a memorial is. And my 6-year-old says, Papa, I know what it is. It's a memorial for the funny guy. Anyway, back to the hearing aid store. So I lost my hearing aid. I called Margie. I said, Margie, look around your house for the hearing aid. And then I thought, where was I? Where else I was? I went to the Rose Garden because that's where I had went later in that day. And I actually found my hearing aid in the Rose Garden parking lot, smashed. I called Margie to say, hey, Margie, you can stop looking for my hearing aid. I found it. She says, oh, you can have Steve's. I'm wearing Steve's hearing aids. He's still in my ear. He will always be in my ear because my tendency is not to listen so well. And another thing I wanted to say, I'm really grateful having spent a little bit more time with Steve's extended family. Margie and Steve and I knew each other, but I didn't know his kids so well, and precious people on this planet. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Tom Jacobs. I met Steve in 1994 when I interviewed for a job at Intervision. I can only remember one detail from that meeting, but it told me a lot about Steve's character. What I remember is that the interview seemed to be going pretty well when suddenly Steve realized it was around 5 o'clock and so he needed to wrap up. He said he needed to get dinner for his family. I had no family of my own at that point. And it just really struck me that Steve was a family guy. And I really liked that about him from our first encounter. My first significant memory of Steve was just a few days after I started working at Intervision. He came into my office, sat down, and started asking questions. What was I working on? How long would it take? Did I talk to the client yet? Lots of questions. I was relieved when Steve finally left my office. I was hoping I would be working mostly with Jerry. But a few days later, I was heading out to Full City for a cup of coffee. For some reason, there was never a coffee maker at Intervision, which turned out to be a blessing. Steve was on his way to Full City also. We walked together to Full City that day. And the next, and the next, and the next. And so began a ritual we carried on day after day, year after year, rain or shine. We cherished that 30 minutes together and look forward to it every day. We were actually a little disappointed when the new Full City opened so close to the office because it cut into our walking time together. As I began working with Steve, I came to appreciate his intensity. I realized the incessant questioning that put me off at first was actually a key to Steve's brilliance and success. Time and time again, those questions proved invaluable and made our work better. Steve not only had good ideas, but he had the courage to stand behind them, and sometimes in the face of considerable adversity. I mean, his approach sometimes rubbed people the wrong way. I can recall a number of meetings when kind of appeared everything had been resolved. Client was happy, we made a decision, ready to move on. And then suddenly there would be a pause and Steve would say, just to play the devil's advocate. And then he would begin to, there would be looks of annoyance and he would begin to kind of poke holes in what had already been decided and point out the issues. He never shied away from conflict when he believed that there was a better solution out there. And though I don't have evidence to support it, I know there's a lot of evidence-based people out here. Steve was usually right in the end. He really was. He was an excellent writer. Over the years, he was invited to co-author on numerous peer-reviewed papers, and he was often the only co-author in that group without a PhD. But his contributions, comments, and suggestions improved many a manuscript. I know I'm a better writer and proofreader thanks to hanging out around him all these years. Working at Intervision was the best job I ever had. Every day I look forward to going to work, in large part because I got time to spend with Steve. He pushed us to learn new skills and approaches, took on projects that we had never done before, didn't know how to do. I remember one project, he said, we need to design an interface. I said, I don't know how to do that. He said, we'll figure it out. And we did. He often believed in us before we believed in us. And again, that took courage. Steve was not only my boss, colleague, and mentor, he was also my best friend. He had held up a pole at the chuppah when Karen and I got married. He attended Gabe's bris. And recently, my daughter Emma told me that growing up, she thought Steve was her uncle. Steve and Margie have been there for us whenever we've needed help or support or a shoulder to cry on. And yes, to echo what Alito said, Steve was a great listener. His empathy and gentleness emerged in all of those questions that I had originally found so disturbing and threatening. Over the last few years, with Intervision behind us, Steve and I had the opportunity to collaborate once again on Click City Tobacco, a project we'd worked on for more than a decade. As narrator of the entire program, and in the whimsical role of the heavily accented mad scientist, Steve will live on for many years, persuading kids everywhere to avoid tobacco. Of course, for me, really for all of us, Steve will live on forever as the man with the tough questions and the gentle soul.
Hello, I'm Herb Severson, and thank you for the honor of being here and being able to share some thoughts with you. Steve was a very dear friend of mine. He was always interested in the lives of others, and you've heard that already. Well-read, politics, sports, and so on, but most of all, he was just really interesting to talk to. And as it's already been pointed out, probably because he was such a good listener. I worked with Steve for over 40 years. He was so creative. He was always full of ideas on how to take concepts and ideas of others and translate them into media. The key to his success of many scientists was his ability to take thoughts that we had and concepts we had and convert it into video, web, mobile, and carry a message that really made meaningful what we were trying to convey and ultimately inspire the audience. I first met Steve when he produced a video for our tobacco prevention program, which is, by the way, where he met Margie. And over the years, he's worked with a number of psychologists to produce video programs on treatment of depression, promoting healthy diet, cessation of tobacco, preventing alcohol use, and other social problems. The key was he was always calm and confident, and he dealt with all these conflicting views. And you can imagine all these scientists and all these people that are sure of their ideas, and yet he is trying to make it into a media program. And yet he had a way of calming us and getting us clarified and making us confident that we could do it. He was great to work with. And he met the challenges of working with many very strong-willed people by keeping us working collaboratively together. Now, I must say there were some challenges at times. I worked with him on over 25 projects, and over that time, certainly there were differences in opinions and views that came up. But whenever Steve and I had a conflict, we would schedule some time to go to Beppe and Gianni's and or some other place and drink some wine and have some appetizers, and we would always resolve things and remain friends. And our goal was always not just completion of the project, but make it successful for us to feel good about working together. It always worked. I told Steve that we would become better friends once we stopped working together. And it came to pass, that was true. You know, after his diagnosis, we became much closer. We shared experiences of our treatments together at the Willamette Valley Cancer Center. And we found time to meet weekly for coffee meetings to discuss life, death, love, politics, and of course, duck sports. I treasure the time we had together. Our trip to Costa Rica with Steve and Margie in December was wonderful and healing. We had some magical time together, including ziplining in a rainstorm. In Nosara, we would make pina coladas by the pitcher and then walk to the beach and watch the sunset every day. We also had some great times at our mountain cabin, mainly exploring ways and ideas and methods for expanding our minds. I admire the way that he dealt with his diagnosis and treatments. He was an inspiration and a model for all of us facing the end of our lives. He was so open and honest about what was happening and grateful for the opportunity to focus this time on family and friends. Even in our last conversation, in which he was very weak and facing the end of his life, he was energized by sharing with friends. And he told me that cancer was a gift because it focused his life on renewing his love with his family, including his brothers and sisters, and of course, Margie and the kids and other friends. Steve's ability to face death can teach us a lot about embracing life, honoring our relationships with family and friends. It's been said that to live life, you must accept death, and Steve taught us the way to do this. Maya Angelou once said, "We will not always remember what a person does or what they said, but we will remember how they made us feel." Excuse me. Steve made me feel heard, valued, and special. Steve was a model for our life. His was a life well lived. I loved him. And he'll always be my friend. Thank you. I'm Michael Rookley. I've had the pleasure of spending much of the last 24 hours with some of the old Antioch team, and I'm reminded of Steve's 60th birthday celebration at our home here in Eugene with some of those Antioch folks. I think we called them the Antioch Five at the time. And I asked this good-sized group of well-wishers, what is it that we love about Steve? Why do we love Steve so much? And the answer had to do with our admiration for where he had chosen to place his love. And there were three things in particular that came from that evening. The first, of course, was his immediate family. Margie and Claire, Jory and Spencer, absolutely the love of his life. But also how he cared for his mother in those final years. My God, we should be so lucky. It was quite amazing. It has never left me. And then, of course, his care for Corey half century ago. So his family. And secondly, it was his work, choosing work that matters, choosing work that makes a difference. I think particularly of his NIH work, ORI work, whether it's dealing with depression, diabetes, smoking, whatever, helping folks deal with those kind of problems, and operating in or letting us know about a public health system that, as we have discovered now during this COVID crisis, is a disaster. As well as his work, of course, with sponsors, and then his work with Danceability. All of that, meaningful work, work that matters, work that makes a difference. And then thirdly, his progressive politics. And as we identified that, I remember David 12 years ago cheering, yes, for him. That was true. Steve's progressive politics. He and I shared an obsession with current political news. My kids recall Steve-O, as they call him, his regular pattern of dropping by our house on his way home. You know, some people drop by somewhere and have a beer or martini before they come home. For Steve, it was coming here. We got our political hits in, and then he could go on. We had a wonderful connection in this regard. And more recently, I should say that he wanted us all to address the serious issues of racial and economic inequities, to confront the threats the threats against democracy, which I think are unprecedented, really, in our time. He said often, and Margie repeated this in one of her letters, that he wanted to be with us after November 3rd. During the past 18 months, Steve taught us all with enormous grace and decency, taught us how to live in the present with absolute honesty, choosing kindness, deepening relationships, some of which had had some bad bumps in the road over the years, addressing those with absolute humility and honesty. Claire and Spencer and Jory are rightly so very proud of their dad. And we are blessed, all of us, to have had Steve by our side and continuing by our side. And let's do our very best to live in a way that honors what we have learned from Steve.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bruce. And a lot of good things have been said. A lot of good things have been said about Steve. We've heard many who have spoken about the remarkable life that he led and how important he was to everyone. And I want to consider why he made such a profound impact in his world, and why most of us here today consider him one of our closest friends. It is important to understand also how, when he faced his terminal illness, he remained happy, engaged, open, and full of the energy of living. Steve did not have a religious background, I assume that's true, or a belief in God. His religion might have been progressive humanism, a belief that each of us can contribute to making this world a little better. I asked him once, what was his religion? And like the Dalai Lama, he said his spiritual approach was kindness. He manifested this throughout his life with friends, employees, and even strangers. He said just making friendly eye contact with strangers felt like a kindness. He put this compassion on the line as one of the founders of the Spreading Kindness campaign here in Lane County. And whoops, what did I do with my mask? We are giving free masks out today, so take it in honor of Steve. This small group of compassionate individuals made meaningful differences in the community, in schools, and in a few businesses. More than 3,000 Choose Kindness signs are sprouting around the city of Eugene and Springfield. But we who knew Steve understood kindness was only a part of his being. He was an unselfish person, and as we've heard, much more interested in others than in talking about himself, asking questions and really listening. He cared. He cared so much for family, going on wonderful family vacations, and he cared for friends, making time for coffee, phone discussions, walks to the bog, even as cancer lurked. Steve cared about social injustice, social inequities, and politics with high hope that transformation might really make things better. He understood that small actions matter and served as board chair at Sponsors and Danceability. He understood that big social movements are needed and was so encouraged by Black Lives Matter, hoping that the harmful impact of racism might be addressed and diminished. He so hoped that he would live long enough to see the Democratic victory after the next election. And we've got to believe that he is working on that outcome still on a slightly different level. Steve was more than a humanist. He had an inherent spiritual side, a deeper awareness and a presence that we all sensed. He could not articulate his beliefs clearly, but he was curious about and hopeful that there's something more than just this life. For 5 years, he was part of a meditation group, exploring his spiritual side and sharing his wisdom and insights. He believed we all have some essence, some aware consciousness that just might continue after death. In his transition, he wanted to be present and aware, able to experience leaving his body and moving toward whatever comes next. He achieved this goal. He was never afraid of his illness or of dying, and most of us marveled at his peaceful acceptance and openness for the process of his illness. He often said that cancer was one of the best things that happened to him. It opened him in beautiful ways to gratitude for all the positive connections he had with people. I love Steve. He brought out what is the best in me. He was open, accessible, and honest, such a good friend. He was smart and thoughtful. For many of us, he was the go-to guy for political understanding and ideas. He loved political conspiracies. For instance, a year ago, he imagined that Trump might try to steal this election. We loved Steve, and Steve loved us. Margie, I'm sure you know, but let me say clearly, Steve loved you from the very depths of his being. And to Claire, Jory, and Spencer, he loved you profoundly. He saw the greatness in each of you. He saw the greatness in each of you, and his only regret was that he would not be here longer in your lives. Steve loved and cared for each of us. He had room in his heart for everyone. What a great lesson. The more you love, the more you can love. And the more love you give, the more you receive. Last year, Steve and I took a pilgrimage to the property his father had lived on in New Mexico. Returning to his land, connecting with his father, was spiritually important to Steve. When someone we love dies, we grieve and miss them. We remember all they were and feel an emptiness in their absence. We also miss the future that would have been. Steve did not get final words with his father, but he made sure that he connected with each of us with love and clarity, his final gift. Steve, I am grateful for and celebrate our friendship. And Margie wanted me to have everyone at this point stand up and stretch or move a little bit before the kids speak.
I know.
He's right now.
Okay, can we all return, please? And hello, hello, can you hear me? We'd appreciate it if everybody would come back. Thank you. Is there something else? Okay, could we all come back, please? Thank you. I know that there's a lot of opportunity that you want to talk to each other and share, but we would like to continue the program.
It's short. Yeah, it's really supposed to be live. It's been a bummer in summer. It's another yeah, it's very different.
These are the words that Steve requested we sing. Turns into a little bit more of a sing-along towards the end. One day, as I stand before you now, I will rise into the sun, and then when my darkness burns to day, I will shine. I will shine on everyone. Gonna be a sweet ride home. Sweet ride home. When it's time, I am a drop. I will fall. I will fall onto the earth. When I fall, I will bloom. Yeah, I will bloom into another birth. My friends, We are made of the stuff of the stars. Born of time and light and mystery. And one day, that change is gonna come. Like when the river falls into the arms of the sea. Here we go. Sweet, ride home. Gonna be a sweet ride home. When it's time to go, gonna be a sweet ride home. A sweet ride home. Gonna be a sweet ride home. A sweet ride home. Sweet ride home.
Wow. All right. It's so many people have said so many wonderful things. It's just so special to see all these people in one place here. I think the first thing I want to say is I want to thank Lee for that. And videos, so many of them, because he was a film guy, you know. I was able to get a little bit of a sense of what it was like to see him and be with him throughout his life, and stories from family members and such. So I know he's always been a great guy, and I know that from my experience with him. I guess some of my favorite memories of him were not really specific memories, but just the feeling of being with him growing up as a child. Not really specific memories, but just his warmth and his strength, and you know, he was my biggest role model. So just feel so lucky to have him as in that position. You know, a lot of people don't get that, so yeah, it was just quite something. I don't really feel bad for my dad or about what happened to him. I know that he saw this as a transition for himself. That's the same way I feel. I know he felt that way too. And I don't know if he's in a better place or whatever, but I know he is in a place. But it sucks for all of us here. It leaves a big void. And I guess we can all just become stronger in our connections with each other and kind of fill that void by just maintaining communication, and I think that's what he would have wanted. Yeah, again, just so amazing to see his circle here and
through the internets or whatever's going on. Yeah, because I've seen people individually, but it's pretty powerful to see everyone here all at once. Everyone has their own circle. It's like one big Venn diagram, but here it kind of feels like the circles aren't very far apart from each other. So, yeah, love you, Dad.
I just want to thank everyone for coming to share and celebrate this moment together in remembrance of Steve, my dad. Our family has received so much love and support from so many friends and family in various forms in this past year. It's truly inspiring to see the level of compassion that you all have shown. I believe in many ways what you put in is what you get out in this world. And while it's inspiring to me, it's also not surprising to see such a high amount of support, given how much my dad genuinely cared about his friends and his family. My dad was admittedly sad to leave us all, but also felt happy and proud of his life accomplishments and experiences in the time that he had. I think it's safe to say that he lived an eventful and profound life. And I know that he truly saw this moment as a transition for him that should not only be a time for mourning, but also a time for celebration. As a father, my dad was always caring, attentive, and generous, and I feel lucky to have had him to support me through my life. He was a leader by example, with a deep understanding that leadership does not mean being overpowering, dictating, or needing to be correct. Rather, he valued listening, working together to serve and help one another in unison, always looking for opportunities to gain new perspectives and share wisdom. He was the leader at his business at Intervision and found success through valuing and maintaining positive relationships with his team and clients. Led the board of directors as sponsors, as you've heard before, for quite some time, as well as Danceability, helping find creative ways to support the transition to sustainable life for many people. Stepping down from his role only a few days before passing. He was always the leader of our family and generally did so in a way that took into account our thoughts and opinions with an open mind. While there were times that his parenting may have felt a bit controlling, he always provided a solid foundation and structure for us that I sometimes took for granted. At the end of the day, he just wanted the absolute best for all of us, and I'm so grateful to him for that. For me, I learned so much by just observing the way he led his life, from his passion for public service to his humble curiosity and genuine interest in others when interacting with them. I've strived to incorporate these values into my life and hope to continue to do so in his honor. I also just wanted to further emphasize my dad's ability to seek out and maintain meaningful connections with so many people in his life. It seemed like wherever we went as a family, whether it was in public in Eugene or even traveling on vacation at times, we'd so often run into someone that my dad knew personally. Whether it was a good friend or an acquaintance of his, he would always stop to say hello and check in with the same level of excitement and affection. He was a bold and confident man in time I really grew to admire how eager he was to engage with others. I wasn't always necessarily a natural in regards to putting myself out there in social situations. But again, I learned so much from watching him, and it helped me step out of my comfort zone in many situations. He helped shape me into the person I am today and instilled in me a love for creating and maintaining a strong, close-knit community for my own life. I was very grateful to have the opportunity to process both the beautiful mysticism and emotional difficulty of his passing with him, before it happened. As he did with many of you, I had lots of wonderful conversations with my dad, especially in this past year, from politics and sports to spirituality, philosophy, and mortality. More recently, he mentioned to me on a few occasions how happy he was to help others confront their own mortality. While he had every right to be frustrated and upset, he chose to seek out the positive and continued to do his best to support others. The way he approached this difficult situation was a gift and has really helped me to be more at peace with his transition. I love my dad, and I hope to continue to make him proud as I told him to do.
Wanted to start by saying thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of you being here today. I am so grateful that we are able to come together to celebrate my dad during such a crazy time in our world, and I appreciate your commitment to participate with us. In addition to being here, your support during this time has meant more to me than you can ever imagine. I appreciate the kindness, countless meals, beautiful words shared through letters and cards, and dearest friends to my mom and dad that have opened their home to me during this transition for our family. I also want to acknowledge my mom, who my dad was madly in love with. I guarantee you I witnessed the highest form of love these past 18 months watching my mom care for my dad. She held everything together and made the life my dad wanted to live possible. And thinking about this moment and what words I could possibly find to honor my dad since very early on in his diagnosis, I've thought about the countless memories and moments, but words often fall short. So today I'll give it my best shot into a glimpse of what my sweet dad meant to me. My dad craved human connection. He had truly the unique ability to foster special relationships with everyone he knew or crossed paths with, no matter how long or little you knew him. He valued everyone individually and in their own light, and he was interested in all of us. Growing up, I used to get so embarrassed because from my observation, my dad would just stare at people. Random strangers that we would pass on the street, people in line at the coffee shop, anyone. He wasn't really staring. Some would never notice, but those who did, my dad made sure to connect with them through a simple smile or head nod. I used to say to him and beg him, "Can you stop staring at people? It's embarrassing me." And his response was something always along the line of, "Claire, I just want people to be seen and acknowledged, and I want people to know that they matter." He made sure that growing up, my brothers and I knew how important it was to treat people with respect and be sure to make everyone around us feel loved and accepted. He was the reason I fell in love with sports and helped establish my most of the time over-the-top competitiveness. He called me Clary. He was my biggest cheerleader and also my biggest critic. And when I lost a game, he taught me it's more important to lose gracefully than to win, something I'm still trying to learn. He loved word puzzles and constantly reminded me of how amazed he was at me for getting the word rivalries which was the word he couldn't figure out, to finish a puzzle that he had spent days working on. He never missed a day of work. He loved Bordeaux cherry ice cream. He made the best squid salad and the best special eggs every Christmas morning. He was a helicopter father. He was tough, and in his mind, he was always right. He gave the best cards every birthday. In conversations, he always wanted to know more. Nothing in his life was surface level. His character was too honest for words, and his openness to embrace life's biggest challenges was admirable. He inspired my love of 60s music and the peace movement. He had a Christmas card and kitchen utensil for my mom to find in our Christmas tree every year. He loved my puppies almost as much as I do. He always asked if my one dog, Sammy, got excited to see him whenever we took the Eugene exit, and always looked forward to my other dog, Oakley, sleeping with him when we visited. We always had to get to the airport 3 hours early for family vacations. He and I had the best full city coffee runs. He was funny, even if he had to tell the joke twice, because we conveniently didn't hear him the first time. He taught me that life is worth it no matter what, and that love is always worth fighting for. He always told Jory, Spencer, and I how much he loved us. I had so many special moments with my dad, but I also had some of the most difficult ones. Early on in high school, I went through some very dark times and started my battle with deep depression that I would fight for most of my adult life. Our relationship changed. These were some of the toughest times, and for most of high school, my dad and I would not see eye to eye. For some, the relationship that my dad and I had could have been one that many walked away from, or that was unrepairable. Neither of us gave up on each other, and in the years to follow, we worked extremely hard to reestablish the bond we once had. We challenged each other, had meaningful conversations, accepted our differences, and laughed at how similar we were. All of my life, I just wanted my dad to be proud of me, and I have no doubts that he was. He was without a doubt so proud of Jory, Spencer, and I. I looked forward to the birthday card my dad gave me each year, as the words he said always meant something. I want to share with you the card that he wrote to me last year for my 30th birthday. Dear Claire, on a snowy day in February 30 years ago, I had no idea what kind of person might emerge into the world that day. Now I know. You are the most amazing, beautiful, and talented person I could ever imagine. You are smart, sensitive, caring, and kind, all qualities that I value. I have loved your strength, your drive, your competitiveness, your street smarts, your compassion, your understanding, and so many other parts of your character. For the past 30 years, you have been the light of my life. Thank you for who you are. Let's share ourselves with each other as often as we can. Every day, I love you more, Dad. I shared some of the sweetest moments with my dad in the last parts of his life. We had days that we would sit together and talk about how beautiful drinking cold water is, and days we would lay together holding hands, saying nothing at all. He made sure that my dogs, Sammy and Oakley, knew how much he loved them. And on multiple occasions, shortly before he passed, he made sure to hold them both and say, I love you so much. You must always know how much I love you, to my dogs.